I'm going to do a few videos on the absurdist stories that I've told about my experience in Vietnam. And I'm going to group them from PHAN, which is PHAN, where I first was. It's a town down on the coast in what was South Vietnam. It's about an hour north of Saigon and about an hour south of Nha Trang by air. So we're going to do PHAN, then we have a series of stories that we can tell about Nha Trang, where I served as the head of intelligence for psychological operations for the better part of a year. And then finally, we'll tell the Saigon stories, where I was tasked with developing a cultural magazine while still in the military. I was a captain at that point. For the 135,000 Vietnamese employees of the U.S. government. It was called Mutual Understanding, and it was similar to cultural magazines that the U.S. government was publishing for the employees at the time in Korea, Philippines, and South Philippines and Japan. So let's start with PHAN. I was assigned down there when I first came into country. I headed a field team, the 32nd Psychological Operations Detachment. We had deployed from Fort Bragg. We'd come over by troop ship on the John Pope, and we had landed at Vung Tau. There were 7 teams, detachments, each with 3 men, an officer, a sergeant, and a specialist 4th class. And we were then deployed around the country, which was in South Vietnam. We were part of the psychological operations okay, okay. So I was sent down to PHAN. In PHAN, we had initially a Jeep Wagoneer, which is totally wrong for that area. We also had later on, originally we had a 3/4-ton truck with a lot of audiovisual stuff. We could go out in villages, broadcast, do one thing, hand out leaflets. We did a lot of leaflet handing out. But we also had 2 air operations every day, which I, as the officer of this team, was taxed with deciding where we were going to drop these leaflets and how we're going to use them. One was a C-47, which we never saw. It came out of Nha Trang with its own leaflets to drop, although we were told where they were going and all that. But the other was an O2, Air Force O2, which was a Cessna Super Skymaster, and this is an airplane that has 2 props, but they're in line, and have one in the front and one in the back. And each engine on that plane was strong enough that if you lost one engine, you could keep flapping along and until you could safely land. And with the O2 operations, we would send one person along with the pilot. The pilot would come down from Nha Trang and then land at PHAN. We'd meet him, put some leaflets on board, tell him where to go. One of the team members, oftentimes I, would go fly with the and dump the leaflets, and then we'd come back and land and one thing another. Then the pilot would go on back to Nha Trang when evening came. By the way, the team at Nha Trang was my 3 guys, but there were also 2 other guys who had already been there, and we augmented that team. There was a field team there, and I think what happened was the officer deroast, which means he departed back to the United States. It's called DEROS. I can't quite remember what it all stood for, but it meant you're going home. And he was going home. And so when I went down there, I met with this fellow for a day or two. And he had introduced me to the CIA guy or the FBI guy who was living down in THIET, down the end of an alley with a CO, which is what the Vietnamese women were called. And he was, I remember his name, I'm not going to use it. He didn't intend to do much. And by the way, he didn't do a whole lot. Well, I didn't either. We were part of Operation Bird, BYRD. It's an ongoing operation down in, I think it was Binh Thuan province, BIENTHUAN, look it up, province, and everything was quiet down there. Nothing was happening. That would change shortly after I left. But for the time being, when I was there, we didn't have much operations until the very end, when I was getting ready to leave. I was there from probably about the 1st of September into December 1st. That means September, October, November. I was there about 3 months down in THIET. Each month, however, you'd fly back as an officer. I'd fly back up to Nha Trang. We have a couple of days of meetings in Nha Trang at the 245th PSYOP Company, which was located at Camp McDermott, adjacent to the Air Force Base, which is the Air Force airport. And we'd hang around, and we had quarters up in Nha Trang, where you keep your stuff if you wanted to, and where when you go in from the field, you go sleep, and so that was sort of how that was. We flew a lot, but because we were flying, and there was the O2's only, I think it probably was a 6-person aircraft, maybe been only 4, but they'd only had 2 seats, maybe a third, maybe it had 4 seats. I don't know, because sometimes we had a third guy who'd fly with us. But in any case, the first thing that they did, they being the Air Force guys, when we came down and you had a new officer who was going to fly with them, is they taught me to fly. And it was, the reason was that if anything happened to the pilot, that I could get the plane back down on the ground safely, and we had a chance of living. So I got Air Force lessons, and I learned how to fly an O2. And I always call that airplane like a sports car. I mean, it was just fun to fly. Later on, I was decided once I returned to civilian life, I decided I should go get a actual pilot license. By that, I mean, I knew how to fly, but I should go get the license. And I was flying these 172s, which were Cessna 172s. Those things were popcorn planes, by the way, I also decided I'm not a guy I should go fly. I shouldn't be flying with myself, because I'm a guy who wants to go, and I would look at this, probably get myself in trouble, because if I wanted to go from Grove, Oklahoma, where the newspaper were, down to Oklahoma City, and the weather was not good, I could convince myself, I can make it. Well, that's how pilots die, and how you kill people on the ground who fly with you, so forth. So anyway, now we're learning how to fly, and what we would do is we would go out to a dirt airstrip. I should give you the layout of the Binh Thuan province. It was all coastal, and very flat for a long area, but there were a couple of mountain peaks to our northwest, and they were called Titty Mountain. Come on, we're guys. We're horny guys. And then there was the mountains, and you go into and the mountains were there, and up in the mountains, by the way, was THIET. It's a gorgeous little town. The French had developed it. It's like Geneva around Lake Lucerne. That's what it really reminded me of when I finally got to THIET and spent a little time up in THIET later on. Well, in any case, so here I am now learning how to land, and we were coming in at Sang Mao one day, and we were doing touch and goes. This is where you land and then you go ahead and take off again. You don't stop. And I was getting pretty good at this, and I was coming in, and on this particular day, the guy, the kid like me, who's the Air Force pilot, suddenly pulled back, pushed the gas all the way up, and we really aborted the landing. We didn't land. And I looked at him, he looked at me, and he said, this is your first lesson, and keep an eye out on the when you're landing, because a water buffalo had wandered onto the field, and we were heading for the water buffalo. We have a couple of stories here. We're going to tell the story about the carelessness in war. You become inured to the dangers, and I guess it isn't that you are unaware of the dangers, you're just tired of them, if that makes any sense. And frankly, it doesn't make sense to me at all. But in any case, we were getting ready to take off. I think we're going back up to trying. We were sitting on the end of the runway, at the northern end of the runway, in the O2 with the pilot, and we were waiting. He'd done all the checks, and we're ready to go. And at this point, the bad guys start mortaring the other end of the runway. Now, this is one of those stories, these war stories, vets get to be, years go by, and, they embellish, that story gets better. Now we're mortaring the other end of the runway. And so, well, actually, I took pictures of it. We sat there for a while, I remember, and looked at this going on, and we're ready to go. It's just kind of, crap. Can we fly through this mortar attack? Well, we're talking about that. That's a bad idea. And so, the Air Force guy says to me, look, we can gun it, and we can get up, 30, 40, 50 feet here, and then we can drop off. We were right on the cliffs of the South China Sea, which was, I don't know how high, 100 feet, 200 feet, probably not more than that, but it was enough. And so he said, what we'll do, if you're okay with this, is we'll gun it, we'll get up. We had plenty of room to get up, and it's an O2, for God's sakes. These airplanes, you can get them off the ground pretty quickly. And then he dropped the wing, and we dropped off the South China Sea. We just did, it's called a slip. And so he did a wing over. So we take off, and then we, dropped off the cliff of the South China Sea, and banked around and took off. We took off in the middle of a freaking mortar attack. And I have pictures of it. And we only did that because we got disgusted. Got tired of waiting. Let's go. It's 45 minutes to an hour back up into trying. Let's go. And so we did. The other story I'm going to tell is we were up in the mountains with a different pilot, and I'm dumping leaflets. What you do is you go up and you dump these leaflets, and it was, whether it made sense or not, I don't know, but it made any difference or not, but we sure littered the countryside with leaflets. Anyway, so we were up in the mountains, and we start picking up smoke. Smoke starts coming out from underneath the dashboard, or whatever you want to call it there, and almost as quickly we lost all electric. And this is not good. This is... So again, the pilot, we kind of did a wing over slip, headed down to got out of the mountains, and then headed back down to the airstrip down at THIET. There's a procedure, probably still true, when you don't have any ability to communicate with the tower, that you come down the runway and you come down the runway and you wig, and then as you turn around at far end, they either give you a green light or a red light. If it's a red light, they say, well, I'm not quite ready for you to land. But if it's a green light, you come around and you land, and that's what we did. And as we're taxiing up to the operations center, and where there were no hangars there. We only had helicopters down there permanently. But the pilot says to me, and I'm not going to use his name, but he said to me, don't say anything. And of course, here comes the crew chief, one of the mechanic guys out, and as soon as we get over and stop, cut the engines, this mechanic guy who works on the O2s and who's kind of there to, and the mechanic guy says, what's the problem? And the pilot says, well, we had a little problem, but I'm going to take the plane back up to the maintenance center in Nha Trang. And it's the pilot's decision. And there's a little bit of argument back and forth. I had climbed out because I was not going on. And so anyway, the pilot prevails, and he had a date with a German girl. I remember he said, I'm not gonna let this go by. I've been working on this German woman, and I think tonight's the night. And so he took off. And to get back to Nha Trang, you went out over the South China Sea. There's a little indentation. Phan Rang was to the north, which was where the jets were. And but you had to cut out through over the South China Sea. Beautiful. It's just beautiful country. And he vanished. He never made it. And that's the way things were in Vietnam, where you know the dangers, and you get comfortable with the dangers, and you think you can, whatever. So I guess we were lucky. I was lucky, I guess, to get out of that airplane. But by the time we landed in THIET, the smoke had stopped, and the plane seemed to be functioning fine, except that, of course, we didn't have any electric. All right, we're going to tell some more THIET stories as time goes along, but that's it for today.